Testing, testing. Hello, my name is Lucy Mann, and today I'm going to be talking about 25 Years of Madness becomes a mashup inside my head by Jamie Hewlett from 2017. I'll look inside the mind of Jamie Hewlett. But first, I want to start by talking a bit about his background, because I think that it's very important towards the piece. This is Jamie Christopher Hewlett. He was born in 1968. And his first kind of rise to fame with his art is when he did a graphic novel called Tank Girl, and it was immediately very successful, and it sparked so much that it even got a movie in 1995, but it failed a little, so then he was in a bit of a slump. And what he is most known for is when he met up with Damon Albarn, and he lived in the same apartment with him. That's the singer from Gorillaz, and then they made Gorillaz, which is what most people know him for, that most people know his art for. And it was very successful, and it still is to this day, despite the fact that it was made in the year 2000. I believe that this is very significantly important, because Jamie was given a lot of creative freedom when he made this kind of thing. He was allowed to write all of the stories, draw everything he ever wanted. And then people started getting a big feel for his personality, the things that he was like. He was also quite crude, quite controversial. This made a big impact on the world, because a lot of people thought that that cartoonism was just for children, that it was very childlike, but he made it a lot more adult. And that really sparked a certain trend of adult cartoons being made. And a lot of people think that his work is very nostalgic because, of course, the year that it was made and the impact that it has had. This is the piece that we're talking about today. 25 years of a mashup inside my head. And when you first look at it, you get a kind of uncomfortable feeling because of the stare, the eyes are all looking at you. It's almost as if the piece is staring at you, and it can make you significantly uncomfortable. It's almost as if it pierces into the soul, and I think this is very significant because it might show how looked at Jamie may feel for in the years, because he is quite a popular artist, you know, so it kind of expresses how he may feel kind of watched when he goes for his entire portfolio. And the eyes are kind of like the window to the soul. So I believe that this piece is a lot of like what Jamie is as a person. It's kind of things, all the things that he has done throughout the years. So it shows the window to him and the person that he is. Speaking of eyes, speaking of like the lighting, it's almost as if the lighting has been manipulated so that the eyes are glowing, and it really makes the gaze stand out. And I think that the lighting is very important within this piece because you can kind of see it's really grim, it's really dark, which is kind of different to a lot of his other pieces, and it shows a sort of personality that he has, that he's adult. It shows the darkness of the kind of works that he creates. I also thought that the lighting was kind of important. Like if you look at the cigarette over the mouth there, it could be as if the darkness is the smoke coming from it and unraveling and flooding the page, and the smoke could represent the kind of controversy that he has expressed through his portfolio. And colour, I think that colour is very significantly important. These are some parts that I thought were quite colourful within the image. If you look at it there, the colour is really mashed together, and instead of thinking that this piece is really bright, it's really brown, it's really muddy, it's really murky, and this is kind of, I think, been done on purpose because it shows that all of the years for his portfolio have been a blur. They've all been a mash-up inside of his head. And it's also kind of jarring compared to his other pieces because he is known for being really colourful. Like these are some of the pieces that he's done. It's really bright, it's really cartoony, but he's decided to make this piece more dark and grim, and he's definitely used the colour to let that come across. Sorry, I've lost my place. The style. We can see here there's a lot of different styles, a lot of different art styles. We've got one that's really cartoony. These two here are more photography. We've got one that's really hyper-realistic. That's kind of the more general style. And I think that this is really important because, like, the mix of faces, he does a lot of faces. With that mix, we have the kind of different sides of his personality, the different aspects all brought together within one piece. Like kind of like this. We've got thousands of different types of different art styles, and it's kind of everything that makes him up as a person. And and with a closer look as well, we've got the composition. When you first look at the piece, your eyes kind of settle in the middle towards the eyes, and then you have to try and work hard to look at the rest of the piece. You need to work to look at the details. You have to really look hard. It's as if the piece really craves your attention. It wants you to look at it, because your eyes can't really settle on one thing because there's so much detail. You've got so much for your brain to take in. It's when you first gaze at it, you don't take it in as a whole. It's like a flood. It's like the atmosphere hits you first. As well, though, your eyes do settle on the corner. You see it's over there, the bottom right. Because it's giving you kind of a clear space. But in the middle of this clear space, he has put this Chinese-styled stamp in the middle of it, and I think that he's implemented this because the Chinese culture is really important to him. He's done a lot of different projects illustrating Chinese culture, Asian culture, and I think that this is kind of a hint and a nod to the kind of works that he creates, and he wanted to put that there because it's really important to him. Something else that I thought was significantly quite important is if you look here, his most famous work was the gorillas, but you have to look for the characters, and you have to dig deep to see them. And I think that because he's hidden them away, he wants people to look at the rest of the work. He doesn't want people to just focus on his most important work. He wants people to see the face there, the tree in the middle, the photography, or the Chinese thing, not just gorillas, because this is what he is as a person, not just that one project. And as well, speaking of the tree, if you look close in the middle, it's kind of dark because he's got this hyper-realistic tree in the middle. And I thought that that was really interesting. Because the way that I see it, the tree, this was a project that he did in France, where he would illustrate a lot of different trees where, like, the quirkiness, he wanted to look at the bumps, he wanted to look at the shadows, and it kind of looks like photography but in black and white, but it's actually pen drawn. And he's put this right bang in the middle of his piece. And I think that this is really important. It's almost as if the tree represents his mind, and everything else is like the fruit or the leaves or the branches sprouting out of it. And this is the things that he offers us, and that is him in his mind. Another thing that I noticed is when he does a lot of portraiture, the the guy at the very top left is actually a famous singer from earlier 2000s called Lou Reed. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. And this is someone that Jamie had a lot of respect for. And he even collaborated with him with a song with Gorillaz. But sadly, Lou Reed actually passed away in 2013. However, this piece was made in 2017, so I believe that this was kind of something to respect him. These were to respect him. It was like a memorial that he wanted to just drop in there to remind people of his existence. In conclusion, I believe that 25 Years of Madness becomes a mashup inside my head is a really powerful piece. It's very strong and it really affects you emotionally with the eyes, with the colour and everything. It's because he illustrates that this is him in his mind. It's like it tells a story of him, and it tells a story of who he is as a person. All of the works he's done over 25 years. This piece technically took 25 years to create, because we've got even works that are from the early 2000s when he first started. So it's kind of a long time to make a piece, if I do say so. And it kind of shows his interest, his passion. I think that it's beautiful the way that he's brought all of the colours together, and it's supposed to be really bright, but it's all dirty. It could illustrate to him the kind of emotions that he was feeling when he created it. And it shows like his personality, his controversy as well. As we stare at his work, it's almost as if his work stares back at us, and we stare into his mind. Thank you for listening to my talk. Does anyone have any questions about it? Yeah.
That was great. I really enjoyed that. I loved a lot. It made me think. I just wondered when you were working on it, did it make you think more about yourself and what goes on inside your own head?
It definitely did.
Did you try and recreate anything similar at all?
I haven't, but when I was researching the piece, I was thinking, what kind of pictures would I have put in if I tried to recreate it? What kind of things are so important to me that I would want to put into my portfolio when I'm in my 50s and reminiscing about the last 25 years? Maybe I will.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions or willing to answer anything? We're fine. Thank you. And now introducing Jamie is
Hi, my name's Jamie, and this year for the Articulation project, I'd like to focus on Ming Cho Lee. Now, Ming Cho Lee is a very famous set designer that worked through many decades and is one of the people that apparently shaped the face of design for the future and inspired a whole new generation of designers to do what they were passionate about. So this is the piece that I want to focus on. It's called Electra. This is one of his favourite designs that he ever done, and it's one of the designs that he attributes to his success and fame, and one of his most inspirational pieces to a lot of people because specifically of the symbolism that's used throughout it. But before I get onto that scene, I'd like to ask the question, who is Ming Cho Lee? Well, Ming Cho Lee was born in 1930 in Shanghai, China, and during this time his parents separated when he was young. And during that time, his father would take custody of him. However, he'd allow his mother to spend weekends with Actually, so that's his mother there. She was really into theatre as well, and she spent a lot of time at theatre herself. During this time with his mother, she'd take him to see theatre productions and view Chinese watercolour art. He loved this time with his mother. He loved his mother with all his heart, and that led him to get into set design. And although she died young, he was wanting her legacy to be remembered, and he really wanted to drive home how much he loved his mother through his pieces later on in his career. So he finished school in Hong Kong. However, he wasn't accepted into Hong Kong University because of poor English schools. So he enrolled in the Occidental College in Los Angeles. And during his time there, he was one of the only art majors and theatre majors, which led him to become the head designer of the college. And this was his first set design that he'd done at the Occidental College, and he graduated from the college in 1953, and he got into the University of California afterwards. However, he only spent a year there because he felt he was done with education. He wanted some real work experience and really wanted to make a name for himself. So that led him to move to New York. And when he moved to New York, he was contacted by a man called Eddie Cook, who introduced him to Joe Mielziner. Now, Joe Mielziner is one of the most famous set designers in New York at that time, and he's famous for the set design of Death of the Salesman. And Ming Chu Lee met Joe Mielziner, and Mielziner was really impressed with his portfolio and work at the Occidental College and how passionate he was about what he wanted to do. And that led Mielziner to take Lee on as an unpaid apprentice. During this time, Ming Chu Lee would work at the annual New York Shakespeare Festival and become the head set designer for the San Francisco Opera House. This is where he'd make two of his most famous pieces in Electra that I'm speaking about, and one of his more famous pieces here. So naturally, Ming Chu Lee wanted to move to Broadway, and he wanted to make a big name for himself there. However, every production he was in was slammed by critics, and they never done very well. Although his set designs were praised, he never felt he made a big enough impact, and he didn't feel like he got the fame out of it that he wanted. Not necessarily that he was wanting for fame, but he just never got the recognition that he felt was due. He didn't want a lot of people to make the same mistakes that he made, so he decided to go into teaching. And he got a job in 1969 at the Yale School of Drama, where he remained there for 49 years until he retired at the age of 88 in 2018. His later career, he was inducted in the American Hall of Fame, in the American Theatre Hall of Fame in 1998, and died in his home in Manhattan at the 23rd of October 2020. So back to the piece that I want to focus on. This is Electra. First of all, what is Electra all about? Electra is about Electra and her brother trying to get justice for the trying to get justice of the murder of their father that was committed by their mother and her secret lover. This production was also taking place during the Trojan War era, so it was about 3,500 years ago, give or take. So when he was designing the set for the production, he'd done a few sketches of different spatial awareness. He wanted to figure out how much space he was allowed to take up, what he wanted the design to look like. He'd done a lot of research of the time and how that and it shows how it influenced his design, because the stone and the patterns kind of symbolise the time and how it was past, and how it was before proper buildings and structure. However, he was going through it and he'd done a few drawings, and the platforms are really important as well, because he wanted to have the set start from the bottom and lead up to the big finale. That shows there's a lot of different stages to the production. And on the right hand side here, we've got an example of a model box, and this is what he led to go and create. When he created the model box, he took a lot of different ideas. Now, a model box is when the designer will take a lot of different ideas and what he wants, or what he or she wants the design to look like, and play about with different ideas. And it also allows them to give a chance where they can make adjustments if need be before they make the final piece. So this was the actual model box that he created before making the final set design for the production. And he created this to a half-scale inch model, which means a half of an inch is equivalent to a foot when it's all blown up. So this is the final design. And now there's a lot of different meanings that could be drawn from this, but my main meaning is the symbolism of the gaps. The story is all about a murder mystery. It's about Electra and her brother trying to get justice for their mother and not having the full picture. They don't have the full story. They're trying to find out what really happened. There's a lot of gaps and transparencies throughout their design, throughout their story. They don't know everything about it. That's shown in this piece because of the amount of gaps that are spaced underneath and to the side of both of all the rock structures. That shows that Mount took into consideration what the characters were feeling and portrayed it through the set. This is a photo of the actual production when it's put into full and when it was done in 1964. Now you can see there's been a few adjustments to the rocks at the side and at the back. They look a bit more abstract, which could also represent the characters' feelings at the time and how their mental state wasn't exactly what it should have been. And the big door at the back could also symbolise the end of the production and could symbolise, and it could hold all the answers to their questions. As you can see, there's somebody reaching up for the door there. Behind the door, it looks, because of the scenery and because of the outside, it looks like it could almost be a heavenly place and it holds all the answers that they're looking for. However, because of the large shadow cast over the door, it could symbolise that the answer that they're looking for might not be exactly what they're wanting. And I mean, it's also worth bringing up that this production was held outdoors, which could be influenced by the weather. The production, when looking at it, it's not supposed to be nice. It's supposed to have a lot of twists and turns and nasty moments. And that could be represented if it was, say it was raining outside, it could show that the rain could play a huge part in the production. It could also add a big shock factor to it as well. This, I'd like to take into consideration what I'm doing this year for my advanced higher art portfolio. I'm wanting to recreate the scenes from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and make model boxes and set designs for that production. I'd like to draw a lot of inspiration from Ming Cho Lee's work and specifically the secrecy and mystery that he's put into this piece, Electra, and kind of draw a lot of inspiration and make sure my pieces can be, so the audience would look at my piece and kind of think, well, is there something that I'm missing, stuff like that. And I've conducted some research about the Victorian era and started to make models and stuff to further my step forward. I'd like to end here on a quote by Ming Cho Lee saying, "I had no idea how to be a set designer." I've put a lot of emphasis on had because it really shows that anything's possible when you put your mind to it and never give up your hopes and dreams. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thanks, that's great. That's really interesting, and it's obviously quite a personal thing for you if you're using this as an example of your own work. Can you tell me a bit more about what you do with your own stage design?
What I'm planning to do is I'm planning to have a few different set designs representing the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, say some outside in Victorian streets and some indoors. But I'd like to have a lot of different places where it's maybe hidden from the audience's kind of eye, but they still know that there's something there. It's like a ominous looming threat that they've kind of got about the place, which is in a lot of Gothic novels.
I like the idea, and I like the idea of the kind of in both of them, you've got a side of the dark side and the light side.
Yeah.
So it's a really good parallel.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Is that all? Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Elspeth, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about the Heydar Aliyev Center, designed by the architect Zaha Hadid. Hadid, who was born in 1950 and died in 2016 in March, was an Iraqi architect who studied maths as an undergrad in an American uni. And then she went to the Architecture Association in London, 1972. She was known as the Queen of the Curve when it came to architecture, as she was she constantly made these swooping and elegantly complex structures that totally transformed skylines. And basically, it was usual for her to not include like corners or sharp edges as your usual blocky and rectangular, in my eyes, kind of boring structures. I like how unusual she was, and she liked to go out of the ordinary. And this center is basically, I think it demonstrates her design. This is the Heydar Aliyev Center, and I think it demonstrates this idea of the elegant structures that she continuously makes. And it opened in Azerbaijan in 2012, for which she won the London Museum Design of the Year 2 years later in 2014. It's inspired by Antonio Gaudi's principle that there are no straight lines in nature. So therefore, she made it one of her top priorities to make sure there are no straight lines, well, except this straight one. But and this is also, the building itself works in harmony with this, as it's plotted on a natural steep slope, which means the plaza works in harmony with this, with the stairs, and so they didn't need to cut out the slope, so it can work in tandem with the slope. And yeah, and one of the most important and indeed complex elements of this project is the facade, as the wave-like roof, and almost flowing straight into the nearby Caspian Sea, has a total area of 40,000 meters squared, and then consists of 2,027 panels of these white, shiny, basically, panels, and that of geometrical forms. And what's more, these bright whiteness of the cladding, it not only symbolizes the bright future of Azerbaijani architecture and culture, but it also manages to reflect the light from, as it's like Baku's quite warm, so obviously it's light. And the sunshine accentuates the building's unusual shape, casting a playful shadows warping as the sun moves across the sky. And at night, the center is illuminated from the inside out, projecting a light from the heart of the project onto its surroundings. So for a bit of context about Hadid and my link to her, it's very tenuous, but I found, since I was actually 6, I visited the Museum of Transport in Glasgow when it first opened in 2011. And obviously I was only 6, so I was more interested in the interior with the cars and all of that. But I do remember she definitely, I could tell that she focuses more on less of the, oh, it's like boring, just make it like, as long as it's functional and whatever. Like, I was more interested in, there were cars on the wall, and it was like a Christmas decoration on a shelf, but obviously quite a bit bigger. Or, for example, the circular floating, in my eyes, bike rack. And it was sort of, it wasn't so much about the, oh, it's a cars and you're presenting transport. It was more, the transport is integrated with the design, and you can see how it all works together, and even the outside, I think, is really cool, to be honest. And it's not so much just a block, and, well, that's my favorite part about Hadid's work, to be honest. And this is also demonstrated in her other works, like, for example, the Dubai Opera House and the Innovation Center, which is used for tech companies. And obviously I won't be visiting the Dreams Casino, but in the middle, it's just as impressive on the inside as the outside. But she doesn't also just design buildings. It's also the Abu Dhabi Bridge, the top right, and also the International Beijing Airport. So back to the Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku. So the multifunctional hall, which is, actually I can show you it. So the site plans in architecture, I find them really useful because it gives you like a bird's eye view and shows you the context of where it is and how it's situated and how it works with roads and where the coast is and whatever. And it clearly shows you the cafe is before the plaza, and then you have the auditorium with the main entrance. And in total, there are 9 levels. There are not rooms in every level, don't worry. Instead, in the first floor, there's an auditorium, the multipurpose hall, cafe, and welcome zone. And in the multifunction hall, it's 27 meters wide and 10.5 meters high, like 6 of me standing on top of each other. It's quite high. So it needs to be constructed with steel open web trusses. And in the 3 meeting rooms above, there's a concrete rigid system which transfers the gravity loads to the concrete floor slabs by columns, beams, and shear wall. And also in the auditorium, which is more warm light instead of the bright white light, it's 18 meters high and 28 meters wide, so it can be used for conventions but also music performances, as it seats 1,200 people. And the section of 4 levels embraces 2 multifunctional halls, meeting rooms, and a media center as well. And one of the most critical but challenging elements of this project was the architectural development of the skin of the building. As you can see in the bottom left, that's it without the cladding and materials on the outside. And it was so hard because they wanted it to flow with the Gaudi's principle and therefore appear homogeneous and consistent without any blocky shapes. So overall, the center principally consists of 2 collaborating systems, a concrete structure combined with a space frame system, and to achieve the large-scale column-free spaces that allow the visitors to walk inside the interior freely. Curved boot columns on the right are used, and also dovetail tapering of the cantilever beams, so they're not stacked on top of each other, they can interlock. And the curved boot columns, they create an inverse peel effect, as in opening the room instead of closing it on towards the ground. And to do with the cladding material, glass fiber reinforced concrete and also polyester were used as ideal cladding, as they allow for powerful plasticity and of the building's design, whilst also responding to the multifunctional demands of the plaza, but also the building. And the reinforced concrete, which is mainly used to construct shear walls, is also used to construct the footing of the building. And as earthquakes are one of the biggest threats to construction in Baku, the building must be reinforced by massive 150-foot long concrete piles below the Earth's surface. So that's quite a lot. And this is obviously used to withstand the earthquakes that can measure up to like 7.0 magnitude. And not only does Baku suffer from earthquakes, but they also, Baku actually means where the wind beats in Old Farsi. So it's subject to high wind loads throughout the year. And as the city lies within the seismic zone, the project's structural engineers were quite challenged. And hence, again, the 2 collaborating systems, like the concrete structure, which is the red on the right, and then the space frame system on the left. So overall, I really love this building, and including the exterior and the interior. and many other designs by Zaha Hadid. And someday I really wish to go see it in person, and many other buildings by her. Thank you very much for listening.
Great. I have questions actually, but one particular, I just wondered, are you inspired by her, because you yourself were interested in becoming an architect?
Yes.
So you also mentioned Gaudi, and I wonder whether you've seen any Gaudi's buildings.
I should have.
So no, it's just like, I would encourage you to go.
Yeah.
It's quite easy to, well, it's great that you was inspired by the same transport. But,
Yeah.
and I thought that was really interesting. And I particularly love this last finish because you've got this whole idea of the kind of concrete interior, or the kind of structured interior, and then the kind of flowing exterior.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Just the first image you showed, it made me think of a fish, the shape of the building.
It does.
Yeah,
Oh my
and
word.
I just wonder whether you thought about that, because it's
No, but that integrates with it like flowing as well,
yeah,
like through the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah.
Oh, I
And when
hadn't
you
thought
showed
of
the
that.
other view, it was completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, the other views, it's more contemporary, whereas the first, it's like, it's the outside, it's like it's flowing, and
Yeah.
oh, I like that actually. Very
Yeah,
nice, yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much to Elspeth, Jamie and Lucy for kicking off the afternoon's presentations. We're now going to have a 10-minute interval. I am going to ask the adjudicator, so Francis and all the speakers, if you can come with us. We're going to do a quick picture of you all to send and to share with our audiences. And for those of you watching at home, we'll be back at 10 to 5. Okay, thank you.
And there are some bottles of water and some biscuits if you give me 2 minutes.
Are we going that way, Sarah?
If you guys start the right way, I'll be quick out this way.
Coraline say that they were lying enough all three and then you get another one.
Makes all the difference.
Oh, what was it called? Yes, Ellis Carr. Oh, yeah. Ellis Carr. Carr Ellis. So do you teach there? What do you teach? Art. So how long have you been teaching there? Oh dear. I just like my studies a bit. Excuse me. It's such a good deal. I was never doing that. She's really so look at my favourite artist. Which is she's I'm quite keen on beautiful work that she's taking into sort of like cartoon figures. Which is modernised, so you get these really abstract kind of background that she's throwing into good and creatures, now creatures, I would talk and stuff. So. I know it's like to see. It's almost like Anyone who just, you know, Sunday basis, you know, real place, there's animation. So, caricatures, not caricatures. Certainly. I was watching it. It's such I knew. Yeah. She's got this really, well, that's kind of what the passion, but you know what I like. I think it's great. Yeah, that's what
I'll leave the biscuits here so if anyone gets hungry during the thing, you can cut them out.
Because it's not somebody giving you which is the translation.
Something. Right, obviously, and everything. Yeah, everyone's really great. She never was on. And I was like, we were trying to get tests to go good. And the tests and shouting and so, because I think it's just that, and the only because she was saying, go away. Yeah, goes to yes, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, here it's just have to say the input I got. So that's what I wrote. No, it's not I just thought we would get caught. And then I transferred to Edinburgh, and I listened to calls on there in the kitchen. It was like, make more guys. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I can imagine that. If you think of it, I'll be colder. And I just used to, okay. Oh, I was just there. I hate your guts, man. It's just I think and I go, moving, just not going to get it. All my goes, he did it. I'll see your family, you'd say. Honestly, somebody down here, sounds real. But on scene, yes. Once I said 4, the next thing was there, and then everything. Whoa, they were stunning. And honestly, every single what's honestly, some of them, they used to. Well, they had already or cheers inside the tail, but Jimmy Boyle, he was balling. That she was balling. Yeah, but she wanted that. Yeah. Jimmy Boyle, he was balling. And then he married a friend of that's right. Jimmy Boyle was balling. Yeah, I can't believe he was as passionate about it. Yeah. That's yeah.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. If I can please ask you to return to your seats. And it's now my pleasure to introduce you all to our fourth speaker of the afternoon, Josh.
Hello. So my name's Joshua Fleming, and I'm going to be talking about The Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is a film that was directed by Wes Anderson and released in 2009. So this film is based on the Roald Dahl book of the same name, and it essentially revolves around a fox who is a thief by trade until he has settled in a domestic life with his wife, not by choice, but because he has a son to look after. And the whole film essentially revolves around a character who is very much not enjoying his current place in life and wants to keep aiming higher without realising what he actually has in front of him and behind him that's already there that could potentially make him content and happy. So it's really quite an adult message that's reflected in the film. And what I really want to talk about is how this production and how the way that the film looks and was made actually relates to this kind of anti-conformist message that the director was trying to get across with the way that he was making it. Because at the time, animated films were all being made the exact same way. A lot of CGI films that were done at like 24 frames per second, really smooth and streamlined sort of thing. Whereas this film, Wes Anderson specifically wanted to capture this jankiness about the characters. It was filmed at 12 frames per second, which is completely different from the competition. And about this, he said, "We could have done it in 3D very simply. I haven't seen many 3D movies. I'm just not involved in it." So there is this kind of, not resentment, but a willingness to do something different that I think was presented. And what's especially interesting, I think, about a lot of this film is that it's completely inspired by real life things that Roald Dahl experienced. The character designer for Mr. Fox was actually told that he was supposed to be a mix between George Clooney, Roald Dahl himself, and a stuffed fox. So right here you have a shot from the film that I want to mention, because that tree that's in it is actually directly from the book's cover from the initial release, and it's a real tree that has unfortunately fell down, but used to be standing on top of that hill in the exact same place, and notably quite close to Roald Dahl's own house. And right here is the office that Mr. Fox is in throughout the film, and you can see at this point he's about to plan a heist, because, like I said, he wasn't happy with his current situation and he's about to ruin everything. So this is actually based on Roald Dahl's office himself. You can see that the chair, the table and everything is the exact same. Wes Anderson wanted to capture Roald Dahl, his essence and everything, because he found him to be a quite flawed figure and an interesting figure. He said that in this film, he found that the character was supposed to be more flawed than the book, and that's because he really wanted to capture this flawed nature that I think more people are realising about Roald Dahl as the years go on. And about the production, right here I want to mention the fact that these dolls, these puppets, are done differently completely from other animated films. Films that were released that year were Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs, which is the third most successful animated film of all time, which grossed about $888.6 million in the box office. And that was, of course, CGI. But another film that released that year was the second most successful stop motion feature, which is Coraline. And Coraline, again, was 24 frames per second, kind of trying to capture this CGI without expressively like using it. Completely against the grain. Again, Wes Anderson decided that these dolls, the character designers and the puppet makers, would, instead of using the Nick Park technique, who's the creator of Wallace and Gromit, he created this technique where you use different faces for the different characters for each expression and each different movement. He instead had these polyester resin skulls within the characters that could be manipulated so that there could be more of a subtlety in motion and movement, because again, Wes Anderson was not afraid of this jankiness and this unfinished polished nature of it, because he wanted people to see that these figures had been manipulated and been moved. And of course, there's one of the sets. Fox in the Fields. This is just, I wanted to analyse this scene in particular, because I think this is one of the best points in illustrating what exactly the film's about. Because right here you have, of course, fantastic Mr. Fox under a tree, and this is actually a 3-inch doll instead of the, which is about 9-inch doll that they used for the rest of the film, because he wanted to make sure that he could get different scales so that he wouldn't have to spend as much money, which I think shows the kind of cost-effective measures that he would make. And right here, in this scene, which is actually a flashback to when Mr. Fox was younger, you can see that there's this gate that goes across this wall, this hill rather, and this path that leads up to this tree, which is quite a human and civilized way of constructing this sort of road instead of what would actually be an animal's way of doing it. And of course, in this imagery, I'd like to bring up the fact that these brambles that are around the picture complement this kind of untouched beauty that Wes Anderson wanted to use in this film. Most animated films have this lush green grass and forests and beautiful blue rushing rivers and that, but Wes Anderson has these unfurbished, decaying trees and autumny kind of look to his film that he wanted because he just wanted it to stand out. And of course you have this orangey, muddy look to the film, which really brings you down to the fox's perspective, because that's what it would be like on your all fours, seeing all this mud all the time, I think. And that's why it can kind of portray the perspective of the fox. And in this scene, of course, you can see that he's in a full suit and jacket. But what I wanted to bring up is the fact that he puts this blade of wheat in his mouth and then he ditches it away in exchange for an apple, which I think shows that instead of he tries so hard to be this kind of farmer-looking thing, this very human kind of perspective of what a human would look like, an animal perspective of what a human would look like, I suppose. But instead, he kind of succumbs to his desires and decides to eat an apple instead because he's an animal and he just wants food. And right here you can see that he's at home, like I mentioned earlier. He is with his wife not because he wants to be, but because he's kind of been forced into this situation, whereas he's kind of a free bird. He wants to just be let loose and be able to do whatever he wants. So right here he's talking about how his father died around the same age that he is right now. And he thinks that he can't keep living in this. As you can see, there is branches on the top of the ceiling. Mud is actually what's constructing this room, and this doorway has absolutely no door in it. They are poor. But Mrs. Fox, his wife, ironically, says to him that they are poor, but they are happy. But he's not content with that because he just keeps aiming higher. And right here you can see that there's these forks and knife portrayed, like placed on the table. Doesn't even use them because he's a fox. He's going to eat it however he wants. This is a very interesting scene for the production of the film. These apple ciders actually had... at this point, he's trying to steal from a farmer and he sells apple cider, so he's trying to steal it, okay. And these apple ciders have LEDs inside of them, which work as the main lighting source for the scene, and they're bouncing off the characters who have very warm colour palettes for their costumes, which works really well for the scene. And I also like to mention the diagonal sort of way that this shot is constructed, which is something that Wes Anderson uses a lot, is these kind of weirdly flat 2D images that he wants to get across so that people can understand the image better. And right here, what that can portray is that the characters are wanting to get to this location because they want to pick up this cider. And so the shot is directly leading your eyes to that point. And of course, the golden colouring of these cider bottles can portray that it is a treasure that is desired. And I wanted to talk about this as an antagonistic figure in the film. And of course, he stands quite high atop this shelf, whereas this younger boy, Fox, stands quite short, which can instantly convey to the audience the personalities of the character without having to be too in your face about it. It can portray it just through the imagery alone, which I think is another strength of Wes Anderson, his sort of geometric way of framing shots. And of course, after this scene, when they're trying to just steal these bottles, the farmer's wife comes downstairs and there's this change in palette completely from a completely warm and autumny sort of colour palette to this cold, clinical blue, greys, which is used as a sort of signal for antagonistic forces within the film, is this kind of cold, because it goes against this warmer sort of nature that the foxes can see. And what I also wanted to mention is that this sort of warmer, colour palette and kind of magical looking apple cider factory. I mean, they look boring in real life, and yet here they look so like full of life and stuff, is because the fox sees in the dark. So of course he can see it in a completely different perspective from how other humans would see it, because he's in a completely different world essentially. And that, again, difference in worlds right here is a completely normal looking shot. I mean, aside from the fact that these farmer characters are designed to look creepy and disgusting, it basically does look like a real human like kind of world right here, which is completely different from this odd looking one that you get shown for the rest of the film. So after trying to rob all these farmers, he ends up screwing everyone over by digging them further into a hole. Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is about the narrative. And of course, to show this, we have this interesting shot which takes place in the sewers, which is this waterfall pouring down. And of course, that's all disgusting water, but if you look at this, it just looks beautiful. And I think this again highlights the fact that without realizing it, Mr. Fox has all this beauty around him that he's just not really paying attention to, despite the fact that he keeps trying to get further up and get houses that are further up above ground. He keeps falling down into this, like this whole space and finding these things that are even more beautiful than what lies above it. So why does he keep searching for what's above? It's purely artificial and superficial. What he wants is just class and status. He says, I think I have this problem where everyone needs to see me as this quote unquote fantastic Mr. Fox. And this, I think, a real strength of the puppet design here is that the fact that the character's angular features aim downwards in almost a limp fashion. And the fact that it is an animal means that you can easily convey the personality of the character without having to make a really sad face. You can just show it through the movement and the position of the character alone. But even in terms of the character's expressions, there is a real life to them that's brought about by their animalistic features. The fact that this now creates a difference in lighting on this side of his face because it's getting in the way means that it can be more dramatic and more dark on this side. And the light is, of course, on this side, which shows easily quite a bit of a conflict in the character due to the contrasting lighting. And this is just a wee section I wanted to put in because this is a complete stylistic thing that Wes Anderson has. He says, I don't think I ever make choices to bring it closer to me in terms of his style. He doesn't bring these films closer to him. He says, I just make choices to try and make it better, but it ends up being my version of what I think is better, and that just ends up connecting to the other. So basically, this is a trademark of his, is this flat. As I've said before, there is quite a geometric feature to his work, but right here is this straight on to the face, like camera perspective, which really brings you closer to the characters. And I think this is just for an intimacy with the characters, but I also think in terms of this film, you can easily see that when it is flat on instead of at a 3/4 perspective or just side on, you can tell that the snout, you can barely even recognise how far it's pouting out. So it looks as if the character is actually quite human because you can recognise the bridge in the nose and the eyes, etc. And I think this is to make the characters more relatable because they can be seen as more human, which is again why he's dressed up in outfits as well, which has been quite an old technique for ages if you look back at older fables, is to use animal characters to be more sympathetic or relatable. And this one, despite being the same kind of shot where it's further closer to the character, it actually does resemble a fox more. And I think that's intentional because at this scene he's being criticised for his wild animalistic nature. So there is a real attention to detail within the film. Of course, they are used for quite serious scenes, but there's also this consistent running joke with this smash cut to a character that has this loopiness to him. And I think that it shows the strength in this composition because it can be both like in serious moments and in comedic ones. And right here again, you can see that there's this beautiful gemstones around Fantastic Mr. Fox. He doesn't even notice it because he's more interested in getting money and chickens and etc. Okay, so to round off this presentation, I'd like to talk about what is considered the most important scene in the entire film. And I hope that with the rest of my presentation, I've made it reasonably clear. The point of the film is that Mr. Fox is, of course, aiming to be more human and achieve more and be more of a respected figure with a status. And so this scene completely brings him back down to earth. Throughout the film, he brings up his phobia of wolves. Near this point, someone asks him, are you scared of wolves? And he says, no, I just have a phobia of them, which I think recognises that he has this subconscious fear of them, where he doesn't know why he doesn't like them, but he's just put on unease by them. And I think it's quite clear why when it shows up eventually in the film, because unlike every other character in the entire film, it doesn't have any human clothes whatsoever. Despite the fact that the film revolves around characters who are both animals and wearing human clothing, this one in particular is wild. It's also shown through this contrast in Worlds again, where cold is seen as an antagonistic force, and yet here the fox recognises it as a beautiful creature, which I think shows a change in perspective. There is these glaciers which look quite regal and almost castle-like, which I think appeals to Mr. Fox's more, how do you say, materialistic side of his personality, because it looks quite glorious, this wolf's life. And I think this is why he probably learns to respect him, but also because of the fact that because Mr. Fox has been rejecting and using his wild animal nature as a derogatory term throughout the film, as if he's this kind of wild animal who can't help his instincts and that's a flaw of his, it comes to the point where you think that that is a bad thing, but in actual fact, he learns that it isn't, because this animal's surviving on his own, despite Mr. Fox needing companions to work at what he wants. And I think he respects that, and also learns that being an animal isn't particularly something wrong. It's something that is quite beautiful. That's how I wanted to end my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, great, again, thank you. And I really enjoyed your enthusiasm for the subject. It is completely riveting, I must say, the whole thing. I'm interested in this idea of him wanting to do something different. Is that what kind of appealed to you about Wes Anderson, about his approach, this idea of kind of thinking outside the box?
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of conformity in not only film, but in animated films in particular, especially since they're basically being mass produced for kids nowadays. You know what I mean? He said that he didn't want it to be just like a kids film. He wanted it to be something that was reasonably mature. You know what I mean? He didn't care about it being a kids film. He just wanted it to be like a good film. And I think that's an approach that more people should take.
Yeah, this is really interesting. You yourself wanting to go into, have you experimented with stop motion animation?
Yeah, since I was quite young, I did it in primary school with my action figures and that, you know what I mean? So I'm quite interested in it. I'm actually doing a animation from a portfolio which is about animals and such, and it's actually an interpretation of an old story, just like how Wes Anderson did it. So that's why I chose this in particular. Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Benjamin. This year I have been researching Guillermo del Toro, who is a very famous designer and filmmaker. I've been researching his movie of Pan's Labyrinth and how that ties in with another of the things I've been researching this year, which is the video game Little Nightmares. So this creature here is the Pale Man. He is one of the main antagonists of the movie of Pan's Labyrinth and the overall story of it. His design of the creature is very practical, and the aesthetic of it is based on his own experiences, which I will get into later on. So a little bit of background on Guillermo del Toro. He grew up in Guadalajara, Mexico with his grandmother. A lot of his creatures that he has made in his overall career are actually inspired by many of the dreams and nightmares that he experienced as a child living in his grandmother's care. He only won, despite how long his career has been, he's only won 2 Oscars in 2018 for his movie of Shape of Water. So he grew up in a Catholic home. He grew to despise that upbringing. He said that he hated the authoritarianism of it, and how he was treated as a child made him come to despise the sort of authoritative figures that he then expresses in a lot of his works and his stories that he tells. His home and a lot of his inspirations for his work also come from Victorian culture, which also directly links to the theme of the movie, which inspired his overall filmmaking career, which was James Whale's 1931 production of Frankenstein. So what is Frankenstein? Well, Frankenstein is the 1931 production by James Whale, which explores the story of a mad scientist, Dr. Frankenstein, and his assistant, who essentially rob graves and build a creature in the sense of reanimating it. And the story it tells conveys this creature as sort of sympathetic, and he comes across this way a lot like the so-called crazy Dr. Frankenstein, and how he makes his own creatures and how he also makes them relatable to the audience. So in the mid-1980s, he founded his own effects company, which is on full display here, and the creature he made for his Academy Award-winning movie Shape of Water. His mentor is a very famous makeup artist, which goes to show the sort of experience that he was given. With this experience, he ended up going a lot for practical effects as opposed to CGI. So any and all CGI that he uses only enhances the practical effects that he's already made on his own. So this here is the Pale Man, and I'll be talking a little bit more about him. But first of all, I'm going to talk about the production that the creature features in. So Pan's Labyrinth is a movie that was made in 2006. It's based in 1944 fascist Spain, and it follows the story of Ophelia, who is a young girl who's moving to stay with her tyrant of a stepfather.
who is a very important general in this fascist Spain era. She is led in the middle of the night by a fairy to this labyrinth that almost creates a contrast between these two worlds, and she goes and she explores this place where she finds a faun. He acts as a sort of guide. He is another of Guillermo del Toro's creatures, which he actually saw in a lucid dream while he was staying with his grandmother at a young age, which then featured in this production. Captain Vidal is a character that is very prominent, a very prominent antagonist, which comes to represent that authoritative figure that Guillermo del Toro despises. He also comes to represent a running theme in this work of white men in power, which he talks a lot about in this story specifically, and he criticizes it a lot. So some parallels between Captain Vidal, who is the aforementioned stepfather, and the Pale Man, who is another of the main antagonists, comes in the banquet scene. They're both so-called pale men characters. They directly parallel each other here in not only the composition of the shot, but the overall theme of it, with the banquet and the fireplace behind them, with the overall, the sort of colors as well, is very similar to each of the shots respectively. So on the left here, we have Ophelia and Captain Vidal, who are in this fascist Spain realm. And then on the right, we have the sort of more fantastical realm of, with featuring the faun and the Pale Man who is up here on the top right. So who is the Pale Man? Well, the Pale Man is the main antagonist in many senses, maybe not the main antagonist, but one of the main antagonists. In his introductory scene, Ophelia is told by the faun to go and fetch something from his lair in order to prove that she is this sort of royalty that he says that she is. So this is one of her tasks. She's told not to eat any of the food on the banquet table or he'll reanimate, but unfortunately, even though it's just a small, tiny piece of food that she thinks he won't miss, it's enough to reanimate him and he comes after her. And the true horror of that scene is in the way the composition of the shot is made, and even though he's not directly in shot of the main foreground, he can be seen looming in the background, even in a blur, and he's sort of janky and moving towards her in a sense that makes the viewer feel claustrophobic and vulnerable in the same way that she does. So this is the early concept art for the Pale Man, a lot more saggy, a lot more wrinkly, definitely a lot more sort of less to him than the eyes on the palms, which were later changed. This is the concept art for the sort of hallway and the lair on the left, and then on the right here we have the final product of that same picture, and above is the mural in the main area. So the Pale Man was constructed using a green screen suit on the actor of Doug Jones, who also did the faun, but using practical effects, just silicone and paint, and mechanics to make the eyes blink as opposed to using CGI. These eyes were also directly inspired by the Japanese yokai, which is a monster spirit called Tenom, which also has the same feature of the eyes and the palms as opposed to the face. To get into a little bit more about the work that I am directly paralleling Pan's Labyrinth of, this is Little Nightmares. It is two short stories which comprise into one main story, and it follows two children exploring this sort of corrupted world full of these authoritative figures which are essentially coming after them in the same way that they do in Pan's Labyrinth. So to get into a little bit more about Japanese folklore, as I mentioned, was a direct inspiration for the creature of the Pale Man. This is the Japanese yokai Tenom, which has it's blind to the face, but it has eyes in its palms. There's a very few excerpts of what it actually does, but one of the main ones details this sort of old man with eyes in its palms as opposed to its face, and it chases someone, and this can also be seen in the movie of Pan's Labyrinth with Ophelia. This Japanese folklore also acts as a direct inspiration to the character of the teacher, which is another authoritative figure in Little Nightmares. This Japanese ferret was called Vakurokubi, which has the ability to extend its neck in the same way that the teacher does in Little Nightmares. The selected work is very inspirational to me due to not only the links and themes, but the overall aesthetics of both works. I like how here is a direct comparison to the way the Pale Man advances towards Ophelia in the same way that the guests do towards Six in Little Nightmares. I also like how he grounds his work in reality in the same way that Little Nightmares does, where lots of things you will see in real life, but none of the things that are actually happening would ever happen, and it's so surreal but done so effectively to the point where it's believable. So his use of fantasy and fiction to convey real-world issues is very prominent in this work. I like how he uses the sort of corruption of innocence and of the commentary on people of privilege and power, corrupting that innocence, which is done very well through the use of the food on the table. And even though the Pale Man is not eating it, he is still taking full advantage of that, and he wants to keep it all to himself, which shows the greed. Its subtlety is a very good and powerful method of storytelling, which I really enjoy that he uses very effectively in most of his works. So to finish off is a quote from Guillermo del Toro, in which he says, "The Pale Man represents all institutional evil, feeding on the helpless. It's not accidental that he is A, pale, B, a man. He's thriving now. These are Pale Man times," which is a direct commentary on the white men in power that he makes the criticism and the commentary of the people of privilege that he is directly comparing this character to, in the same way that the mural painted on the ceiling of the lair, which even though Ophelia sees, she's almost feels under a trance in the same way that she doesn't feel scared by it, despite it being a literal representation of the corruption of youth and the literal consumption of youth, which she's in the same danger of, but she does not notice it. Thank you.
I've seen that wonderful film, it's amazing, and I just wondered what appealed to you most about it and why you chose this. Are they kind of layers of meaning within the film, or is it the technical aspects, the way it's put together?
I think in the beginning, I like a lot of Guillermo del Toro's works as it is, but the overall aesthetic of the creatures that he makes, specifically in this film with the Faun and the Pale Man, are really inspirational to me. And sometimes when I make my own creatures, I direct a lot of the inspirations from the creatures that he has made. So I think that, like, you know, the look that he makes with these characters really can entice someone to look at the overall story of it, just from the overall aesthetic that he creates, even in the small minute details of backgrounds or places that she only sees for a few minutes, but they're so well constructed and articulated that they're really inspirational to me. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Izzy and today I'm going to be talking to you about the art of Midsummer. So Midsummer is a horror film. It's directed by Ari Aster and released in 2019. This film follows a group of friends who travel to Sweden to visit this festival that occurs every 90 years, only they find themselves in the middle of this Swedish pagan cult. I think that Midsummer is a beautiful looking film, but also it's so detailed and there's so much texture and meaning to the film, which I think is the true beauty of the movie. Art plays a central role in this film. It gives vibrancy and authenticity to the set, and it's also used as a device to give meaning to and enhance the visuals of the film, and it also foreshadows what's to come. A very notable feature of Midsummer is the decor of the interiors of the buildings that are seen throughout the film, mainly in Sweden. You can see, like in these examples behind me, that they're covered floor to ceiling in these colourful paintings and murals, which are full of depictions of people, ancient ruins and flowers and strange rituals. Hälsingland in Sweden, where Midsummer is set, is very known for these wooden farmhouses. And inside these traditional Swedish farmhouses would be these magnificent interiors that would be covered in art such as this. And scenes of myths and festivals were often depicted in these murals and frescoes. The traditional Swedish technique that's used for these paintings is called rose mauling, which is a painting technique where colourful floral patterns are used in geometrical shapes and painted on wood. This art style often displays many stylized flowers and scroll forms, combining blended colours and a fine outline on a plain background colour. Traditional paint colours would be derived from local raw materials, and the traditional brushes the hairs would be from a cow's ear or maybe a squirrel's tail. The director Ari Aster was very inspired by this technique, and he incorporated it into the interior design and the costumes throughout the whole film. But these folk art inspired paintings aren't just to look pretty. They've all been very cleverly designed to be tools of foreshadowing, with the painted images often depicting the entirety of the film's plot and the horrors which are yet to come, although of course the viewer and the characters remain ignorant to this. Once you get to the end of the film, it becomes clear that the director has laid all of these little artistic breadcrumbs throughout the whole film. And upon closer inspection, these little clues reveal how dark the film's climax was set up to be from the start. Ari Aster expertly manages to tell the audience precisely what's going to happen, but in a very subtle manner, whilst adding this new sense of dread and foreboding to the sequences that are about to take place. So this scene down here is from one of the walls in the background of a scene in the film. And it depicts this ancient Atastupa ritual, one of which is actually seen in the film. The flowers here represent fertility and regeneration. And this rune, it's called Perth, and its appearance would symbolize initiations and unknown meanings and secrets. You can also see that there are some runes in this painting here, which is also from a wall in the film. And the director used a lot of runes to add another layer of meaning to the film. So actually this one over here, it's called Othala. It's used a lot in Midsummer. It's the most common rune. Traditionally, it would mean inheritance or family, but I believe that here the director uses it to refer to the ancient traditions that are passed down through the Swedish cultists in the name of protecting their family. This rune over here is called Algis, although here it's reversed. And typically a reversed rune would mean the opposite of what it normally means. Normally, this rune would mean protection from evil and danger, but when it's reversed, it could perhaps mean the welcoming of evil. This painting up here of a bear, which again is also from a wall in the film, it's very significant, as the motif of bear is used throughout the entire film as a way of foreshadowing the film's disturbing end, in which the cult perform this human sacrifice ritual where they burn a temple with 9 people inside. By this point in the film, the main character, Danny, she's been chosen as the cult's May Queen, and so she has the responsibility of choosing the final person to be sacrificed. In a bit of a twist, she chooses her unloving boyfriend, Christian, who is then put inside the dead carcass of a bear and burnt alive. And this bear imagery foreshadows Christian's eventual demise at the end of the film. So this mural is the very first scene of the film. When you press play on this film, it's the first thing you will see. And in seeing this mural, you've in essence watched the entire film due to the depiction of the entire film's plot and all the events that has come. But obviously you don't realize this. It goes chronologically from left to right. It starts here with the death of Danny's parents and her sister, to her being comforted by Christian, them arriving at the commune, the Atastupa ritual in which 2 elders jump from a cliff as a sacrifice, and then the maypole dancing competition where Danny's chosen as the May Queen, and then this then leads up to the film's climax. So Midsummer is packed full of real life art references and inspiration. The use of art in the film, as I've said before, is very deliberate. It always has a purpose and a meaning. It's never accidental. And the director's credited multiple artists that he took inspiration from. And actually, interestingly, a lot of these artists have personal links to theosophy and the occult, which fits very well with the theme of the film. I'm going to show you some of these artists' works and a few direct comparisons to the film in hopes of showing you where I feel the influences have been particularly strong. John Bauer. He was a Swedish painter and illustrator, and he's best known for his sort of dreamscape works, which blur Swedish folklore, nature, fairy tales, and mythology with a dark undercurrent. These are some examples of his work. Personally, I feel they're very similar to the theme of Midsummer, and this shows how the director paid attention to and was influenced by traditional Swedish art and folklore. So this is a shot from the very beginning of the film. You can see that there's this big painting in the center of the main character, Danny's bedroom. So over there is the painting a little bit clearer. you can see that it's of a little girl wearing a crown kissing a bear on the nose. So this painting is called Stacas y la Base, which translates to Poor Little Bear by John Bower. The use of this painting, of course, is very deliberate, as it's the first of the bear images that appear throughout the film. Which actually, this one down here, oh no, you can see that one is a shot from the film's ending. So Francesc Kupka, he was a Czech painter. He had a very strong interest with abstract art and color theory, and he liked to try to free colors from descriptive associations. He was also a practicing spiritualist medium, and all of his work is very heavily inspired by theosophy and the occult. And Ari Aster even directly credited Kupka in an interview because of these influences. Painting is Kupka's self-portrait called The Yellow Scale. When I was rewatching the film, I saw that in the scene where Christian's been paralyzed and he's about to be chosen to be sacrificed, I noticed that the shots of Christian reminded me very much of this painting. The position of the sitter and the chair that he's sitting in, I think, are very similar to Christian in the scene. They mirror each other, both squinting, slumped in their chairs, and both the chairs even have the same woven wicker back, as you can see here. This is another of Kupka's paintings. It's called Madame Kupka Between Verticals. When I was researching Kupka's art, I came across this painting, and actually, I don't know about you, but personally, I like it very much, actually. It's probably one of my favorites of his paintings. But I also felt it reminded me very much of the shots of Dani at the end of the film, where she's been chosen as the May Queen, and she's wearing this magnificent dress and crown that's completely made of flowers. The saturated colors and the way in which the faces are engulfed in color and shape, and the slightly pained look on their faces, I think causes the images to eerily match each other. Larsson was a Swedish painter. His works often depicted very idyllic Swedish family life, and I believe he's one of the biggest influences for the murals in Midsummer due to the almost cartoon-like quality to his works. I also believe that his final painting, which is called Midwinter Blot, which translates to Midwinter Sacrifice, has a lot of connections and parallels to the plot of Midsummer instead of just the visuals. This painting depicts a legend from Norse mythology. Also, Norse mythology is very, very prevalent in Midsummer, but don't get me started talking on that because we will be here for hours. But this myth it's about a Swedish king called Domalde, and he's sacrificed in the Temple of Uppsala to bring a good harvest to his kingdom. This, of course, links to in Midsummer, where they hold a sacrificial ritual in a temple in order to promote fertility and regeneration within the cult. Norse mythology also says that blood sacrifices that were done in the Temple of Uppsala would consist of 9 people, just like the 9 in Midsummer. So, in summary, I believe that the director has paid extremely close attention to traditional Swedish art, myth, and folklore whilst making this movie, which is something that I think makes for a very clever and intricate film, and also is really just what makes me love it so much. Thank you so much for listening.
And well done for being last as well. That was very interesting, I must say. And I just made me wonder whether you had any Swedish connections yourself at all, do you?
I don't. I would very much like to visit Sweden, actually. I really wanted to do that.
No.
I don't have any connections to it.
Oh, right. So that's it's just a kind of, yeah, let's say it has made you kind of develop your interest in Swedish art or Nordic art.
Definitely. I mean, like I said, I love the mythology, and Norse Greek mythology, I find it very interesting. So I absolutely fell down a wormhole whilst researching this and just read about it for ages. I was sad I couldn't talk about it, but we genuinely talked about it.
Oh, that's great. I'm very impressed by your enthusiasm anyway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you very, very, very much. So we're now going to give Frances a little bit of time to withdraw and go through her notes before coming back and giving every speaker a little bit of feedback in the order in which you've all spoken, and then the announcement of the third, second and first prize winners of this event. So Frances, you're very welcome to withdraw. For the rest of us, are refreshments still out there? Yeah, so if you wanted to go and grab some more water and another biscuit, you're very welcome to. We'll probably reconvene in about 15 minutes. And I do have some little evaluation forms that I'll be handing out as well, just as a little bit of additional fun, I guess. But yeah, see you back in 15 minutes.
Rebecca, should I put the lights on? I'll put the lights high to the end. Anything